There were some defining characteristics of American life in the Roaring Twenties. The first was that the United States became isolationist in the wake of World War I, and there were new inventions that raised the standard of living which changed American culture forever. Another major characteristic was the first Red Scare brought by the Russian Bolshevik Revolution in 1917. The Red Scare brought the rise of the American Communist Party, strikes, and union drives. Some events during the Red Scare included the Wall Street bombing, Mitchell Palmer's crusade that rounded up 6,000 suspected Reds, and the Niccolo Sacco Bartolomeo Ventese case, where they were convicted of the murder of a Massachusetts paymaster and his guard. With all of this going on, a new generation of the KKK rose up. They were a bunch of Protestant Anglo-Saxon nativists that led secret rituals. They burned crosses and killed with lashes, tar, and feathers. But it was eventually collapsed once people realized the terrorism and the embezzlement of the leaders. After World War I, during the Roaring Twenties, immigrants flowed into America from Southern and Eastern Europe. Some Americans were angry with all the immigrants coming to America because they thought that some of them were radicals. So Congress put forth the Emergency Quota Act of 1921, which stated that immigrants in a given year from a country were only allowed to send 3% of the population from that country that lived in the U.S. in 1910. It was eventually replaced by the 1924 Immigration Act. These acts showed that America was no longer open for newcomers, and for the first time in 1931, more people left America than came in. This ended the era of immigration. A major change in American culture in the 1920s was prohibition with the 18th Amendment. The Volstead Act strengthened prohibition and the banning of alcohol, which had been fought by temperance unions for years. It was popular in the South and West, but the West and the North did not like it at all. The West believed that to combat the law, they would need to break it. This created alcohol bootlegging that was shipped in by Canada from rum runners. The enforcers did not do a good job to stop this, and some took bribes. Speakeasies started to pop up instead of saloons. There was a lot of violence in the cities with gangs because of prohibition. Gangs would do anything to get their hands on the money from alcohol. Chicago was a center in the 1920s for all gangsters. One famous gangster was Al Capone, which had a 6-year regime of a multi-billion-dollar bootlegging business. He was suspected of the cause of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre in 1929. He was eventually sent to jail because of tax evasion. Prohibition was a noble experiment that didn't last long, but it did improve family life and work productivity. The economy boomed and new inventions were created during the 20s. The economy boomed with the help of Secretary of Treasury Andrew Mellon's policies. Labor improved with new machinery and techniques. The electric and automobile industry boomed because it was no longer for the rich. Carl Benz invented the automobile, but Henry Ford and Ransom Olds adapted it. Henry Ford invented the Model T that was cheap and durable and easy to make. He also perfected the assembly line for the Model T. The automobile created over 6 million jobs for people. The standard of living was obviously increased as the car became a necessity for more leisure time with joyrides. Cars weakened the family as women were less dependent on men. There were airplanes being used more during this time. Charles Lindbergh crossed the Atlantic in 1927 in an airplane called the Spirit of St. Louis. He became an instant hero. Radio started to become big as more people listened to the radio, and it was used for new advertising. People started to go see Hollywood films such as The Jazz Singer, which was the first movie with sound. All of this new technology of the decade show a progression to a united American people divided from European culture. Culture in America really started to change during this decade. More Americans lived in an urban area than the countryside, and women sought jobs in the field of low-paying office work. There was also a term called flappers, which women had more sex appeal, who wore short dresses and did the Charleston. People during this time liked to listen to jazz, which was the soundtrack of the era. It created the Harlem Renaissance with Langston Hutchins, Claude McKay, Louis Armstrong, and Zora Neale. Lastly, there was a new generation of authors like F. Scott Fitzgerald, who wrote The Great Gatsby in 1925 as a story about a man who reinvented himself to make it big, then lose it all. Living in America in the 1920s was amazing as everything started to change. America started to change for the better and reinvent itself.